and we are back to discuss we're back to discuss your chapter. You finally released Daenerys 1, which you're a step ahead of George R.R. Martin, kinda. Um, because he's got
I
a few
mean,
sample chapters on you.
I suppose those were written during A Dance with Dragons, though, so we're not sure if he actually has written anything for The Winds of Winter.
Oh, that's
But
right.
he probably has Daenerys 1, maybe. Hopefully, I don't know. Who knows? Who knows?
Who knows? Knowing George, maybe he has nothing, and he's just been fucking with us the entire time.
I mean, I guess we'll never know, right? We'll
By the
never
way,
know.
so for those of you who are wondering, this video will be tackling Preston's chapter. A couple of you guys had some questions, and that's what we'll be discussing. You also wanted to discuss fan fiction, which we can get to a little on
Hmm.
later if you're down, because I know you wanted to discuss that topic specifically. Um,
Sure.
by the way, before we begin everything, I have to say there was one commenter. I think you pinned him in your Daenerys 1 chapter, which was, wouldn't it be ironic if Preston all of a sudden gives up and just he's too busy to finish, so he just tells us to fuck off. I think it was something along those lines, which gotta love it.
And that he's sorry for us. He's sorry. That was because that is kind of the most painful line in that entire blog is, I feel sorry for you. I'm sorry for you. Oh, you're like, oh God. Oh. There could be no worse thing to say.
Well, so real quick, this I want to take a couple of questions. A couple of people on my Discord server had some questions for you that I thought were pretty interesting. This one person, Count Dre, I don't know, he asked an interesting question, and that I wanted to know is that are George's sample chapters for Winds of Winter included in your version?
Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Though
And
there is some question. I mean, the sample chapters are, they're out, so they're going to be they're part of everything. They're canon. But there is some question of whether, like, what to do with the unfinished, like, ones that he's read, so we kind of have an outline, but we don't actually know the content of, like Barristan 2, Tyrion 1, the second half of Victorian. We kind of have a vague idea of what goes on in those chapters, but we don't really know what to do with it.
what
I
about the
mean,
Asha chapter that we kind of saw during the John Oliver skit?
yeah, I mean, imagine if we do an Asha chapter, it's gonna have to have that fragment in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a good fragment, it's interesting. But yeah, no, those are all included. Um, so we've got to write around those, yeah. So, but yeah, anything that's out is out. Now, I don't necessarily think that, um, like for instance, hearsay that Shireen was burned. Like, I'm not sure if we necessarily need to stick to that. Because also George R. R. Martin can change his mind, and so we never know what was going to be the story. So
That is true. So, for those of you who don't know, Dave and Dan, and this was also written in the Fire Cannot Kill a Dragon, the making of the Game of Thrones television show. We covered this in a podcast last year. Dave and Dan said in that book that there's three things that George told them will happen when they first started making the Game of Thrones back in season one. Hold the door, Shireen being burned slash sacrificed, and Bran being king. So you're telling me that you're not going to stick to those because George could change his mind?
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I think a written chapter that's been released, um, like the sample chapters, I think that's established enough that it's not going to be changed. And I think, but for things way down the road,
Mm.
nah, we don't necessarily have to stick to that.
So we don't necessarily have to stick to that because you don't like it or because it's
No,
not
no. I
written.
mean, look. If someone comes up with a chapter and it includes the burning of Shireen, and it's an incredible chapter, no, we'll stick with the burning of Shireen. But I think it's just, as the story goes, what fits and, like, what makes a good story. I don't necessarily mean, like, um, like I say, I'm open to anything if it makes a good story and is, like, well written and makes sense.
Hmm.
So Maybe Shireen will be burned. Maybe she will not. We'll see. We'll see. We're way at the beginning here. We've only done one chapter.
I mean, people are excited for anything wins, even if it's fiction.
Yeah, yeah.
This one person, it's Otter. He had a comment about the Dany chapter. He says
Mm,
Dany doesn't think about why Drogon ditched her or why he hasn't come back yet until he
yeah.
does. In a chapter where Dany questions her identity and wonders if she's earned her titles, this seemed like a chance for her to doubt if she's really the mother of dragons.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the chapter isn't perfect, and I got a lot of input from different people about things, and a lot of times it's like I agree with the criticism, but it's like if I don't have an easy solution for the criticism, like all I can do is agree and continue on with my life. Like
Mm-hmm.
we had to put the chapter out. It was taking too much time. It was like interfering with other things in my life because I was like very focused on it. And at some point, I've got to be like, okay, no, it's just getting published. Like you can't let perfect be the enemy of good. And so, it's not perfect, but it exists, which is something Dan Harmon once said, which I think is good advice. And so, at some point, I was just like, look, this chapter's really good, actually. I think that the writers and editors and everybody did some great stuff, and so I was just like, I'm just gonna put it out. I'm just gonna put it out. Like I've got to close the book on it and like release it, and move on. Because shit, like there's fucking 70 more chapters to fucking write. Like, so, I totally agree that like like if I were to have some criticism of the chapter and how it came out, I would say there's not enough Dany internal monologue. Most Dany chapters have a lot of Dany internal monologue, especially the last Dany chapter of freaking A Dance with Dragons, which is just like overwhelming with Dany inner monologue.
Isn't it just her alone in the Dothraki Sea?
Yeah, exactly. So like at some point, like yeah, it's there could have been more Dany thinking, and how her feelings were, but there was a lot of stuff to fit in, and it didn't fit right. Like I was trying to think about where to put in contemplation about Drogon and like and what Drogon did, and a lot of people were really questioning, like, wait, why would Drogon fly back to Dragonstone? It's like, well, the last chapter says that he flies back to Dragonstone at sunset, and it was sunset. So he's gonna fly back to Dragonstone now. Like, should Dany be dwelling on that and thinking about that and having doubt about that? Yeah, probably. It just I didn't find a place, like I couldn't find a place to shove it in. Um, it just didn't flow. Like, and so yeah, like that kind of happened. I mean, there's other things too, like Moro and Jocko are barely characters. They don't have a single speaking line, either one of them. Like Zekko's daughter is much more of a character than Jocko or Pono, and I think it's good criticism to say like, oh, would have been nicer to have them be villains, and I was like, yeah, it's true, but it just there's no place that really had it fit, and so at the end I was just like, well, what if like Dany doesn't know anything about them and she's killing Pono based on very little. Like a guy, basically she murders a guy because one of his riders had a dragon bone bow. Like she knew nothing about what went down. Like maybe he had a different dragon bone bow. Maybe maybe they were straight up attacked by Ago and it was self-defense. We have no idea like what went down. All
Yeah.
she saw was a guy with a bow and she was like, Pono dies. And it's like, well, she also was probably looking for excuses, to villainize Pono because it meant freedom. So there's a lot of things that you can think about, and I accept all of these criticisms. Like, yeah, there's a lot of criticisms, but it's like at some point, like you just got to publish.
If only George knew
Just
this lesson.
yeah.
I have a question from someone in my server as well, who is an artist herself, Miss Anna. She asks, were there any artists reaching out to you who wanted to do illustrations for your project?
Only in the general sense. I haven't gotten anything yet. Like nobody submitted anything yet. But yeah, if we get enough pictures, like if we go scene by scene, like Dany overlooking Vastoth Rock in the winter, Dany on the Dothraki Sea getting dragged in the cart, getting dragged behind Jocko's horse, Dany talking to, um, Dany talking to the one-eyed crone. You know the offerings like scene, Dany facing the skull of Viserys, Dany looking at the Valerian Sphinx, like Dany floating in the womb of the world, like all these sorts of things. Like if you had a picture for each of these, like I could publish it, do the video again, and then have like art alongside it. People might like that.
Mm-hmm.
But
Well, I thought you were going to do something like that, akin to what we got in Blood and Fire and Blood, Blood and Fire, son of a bitch,
yeah, yeah,
Fire and Blood, where the one scene that strikes out at me at the top of my head is when Arya, she comes back on Balerion's back, and Maester Benifer is trying to cure her, and there's actually an artist's illustration in the book where she's on the table and the fireworms are like under her skin, and you can see all that. So
yeah,
I
yeah.
figured you're going to do something like that. So you're saying there's a chance in the future you might re-upload with the appropriate images of what
Yeah,
happens in the
yeah,
chapter.
yeah, yeah. Um, yeah. Plus, there's a couple of moments where I read the wrong thing. Um,
What do you mean?
there's one. Well, I only know of like one bad one, but well, it's not too bad. But like at the very end, when Zekko's daughter is bathing herself and she gets out, her line is actually she was washing blood off of her muscled body, and I said naked figure because when she then walks towards Pono in the very next line, water is dripping off her naked figure. So in the it's written in the text like muscled body and then naked figure, but I speak naked figure twice, which sounds clumsy. It's a tiny little thing, but it's like, okay, do I want to re-upload the video based on this one little thing, stuff like that. So I don't know.
So there were a couple of smaller groups that formed around this project, some on Discord, some on Facebook, some
Mm-hmm.
elsewhere, and of course everybody reached out to me because of course they did. Uh, so And I told these guys, look, just compile a list of questions, comments, concerns, criticisms, complaints, and send them to me, and we'll pick a couple. And they did
Yeah,
just
yeah.
that. They did just that. And do you mind taking a couple of these?
Sure, sure. I mean, let's keep in mind that like we're building the airplane while flying here. Like it's not like I have some big plan or policy or anything. Like we're making this up as we go along.
Hmm.
So okay.
Uh, this one here I think was pretty cool. Some of us feel that your use of the stallion prophecy jeopardizes the credibility of the crones. The ease with
Hmm.
which they are told the same prophecy greatly diminishes the impact of the first one, but also makes the cows and General Dothraki seem far too gullible, already dangerous, given the lack of their depth their culture has received.
Hmm. No, that's very true. I think that's one of the reasons why the One-Eyed Crow needed to step it up and have Dany be the one speaking it. Because now in the show they just said no, that's like a regular tradition. Like everybody's the fucking stallion that melts the world. Like, which I didn't think is actually. I don't actually think that's a bad idea. That Dany was foolish and thought this like regular tradition was like special for her. It was one aspect of the show that I actually was like, oh, that's kind of fitting. But that was kind of a throwaway line in the show. But yeah, no, I mean, um, it does make Drogo look like an idiot. But keep in mind that Drogo is young and he is kind of an idiot. Like, so, and we're never inside Drogo's head, and we don't know how much he really believed and stuff like that. We only have everything kind of secondhand. That Illyrio is presenting Daenerys and thinks that Drogo's gonna like her because she looks like the blood of old Valyria, and then he seems really excited after the prophecy, and then and then I don't know, he dies shortly after. So we don't really know like how much Drogo believes and stuff like that. So, but yeah, no, I mean, definitely them doing another prophecy. Only how many years has it been now? 2 years, since the first one. Maybe 2.5 years. I'm trying to piece my timeline together. I guess it would be like middle of 298 would be like when the first one happened, and then so it's probably the middle of, it's the middle if not late, what, 300 right now. Um, so yeah. Well, I think that's one of the reasons why they needed Dany to step up the game. you know. But then again, you think about like QAnon and how like gullible those people are.
Oh
Like
my god.
every few months they're like the storm is coming, and then the storm never comes.
The storm never came? Really? I thought the storm happened a while ago. What happened to the storm?
Yeah.
Uh,
Uh,
would you like to get to the next question?
sure.
Many also feel uncomfortable with the ending. While Dany has always been a monarchist, imperialist, and dominating figure, this seems to be an especially dark and domineering move from the Breaker of Chains, especially against her fellow women, clashing with her treatment of her handmaids and I'm gonna butcher this name, Arya, the
Oh yeah,
Larzine
yeah.
girl from the first book,
Hmm.
by assuming a quasi deity status. It seems both out of character and distasteful to treat the Dothraki in such a way.
Really? I mean, Danny did some fucking crazy shady shit in a Storm of Swords. I mean,
Isn't she
you
still
know.
like sleeping? Remind me, because it's been a minute since I read Storm. Isn't she still somewhat sleeping with that handmaid who's kind of like a slave?
Well,
Not really.
she had sex with her once. Yeah, she had
Hmm,
sex with Eerie once,
that's right.
but not since. She just kind of had a weird moment. But yeah, and I mean, in a Storm of Swords, keep in mind that she kills everybody over 12 years old in Astapor, or and like, and then crucifies the wise masters, and like is clearly acting as a deity, as everybody's like calling her mother and stuff. So I don't necessarily think she shies away from that. If anything, I would say that like George writes her a little inconsistent, because if you look at Dany, A Dance with Dragons, she's a very rational, caring person. She has some blind spots. Like she lets Skahaz go and torture some people for no reason. But she just is kind of not thinking about it. But she's bonkers in A Storm of Swords. So it's she's kind of an all over the place character. But I don't think that there's anything that she does in this chapter that is over the top, compared to what we've seen Dany do before. I mean, she just kills some cows at the end, and like takes control of the Dosh Kalin, which we've seen a literal prophecy of her doing. So we're I'm fitting it right in with just the prophecy of the House of the Undying. Like that's the ending that was there. So the Dosh Kalin bowing to her. So um, that's that ending was pretty set in stone. I couldn't undo that because of the House of the Undying. Like the Dosh Kalin we're gonna walk out of that lake and bow to Dany, and sort of like, what does that mean? Well, I mean, you could be like, oh, so they bowed to her for no reason, and no, I mean, if they're gonna bow to her, it's gonna be some sort of religious like reason. So um, that's what I had. But so I just have to get there. So I don't necessarily think Dany did anything super out of character in this chapter, and I don't think it was outside of like George's plans or ideas, considering it fit right with the House of the Undying. But I don't know. Some people are going to disagree, have different perceptions of Dany, but I just think Dany is an all over the place character. I don't necessarily think she's the best written character that George has. just because
You
she's
like
so
Theon
inconsistent.
better.
I do like Theon better. I think Theon's great, but even if I go with a character like Ariane Martell, I think Ariane Martell is a much more consistent character that makes sense than Dany. Um, you know, it's Dany just it's really hard to reconcile Dany's personality in A Storm of Swords with the personality that we've seen both before and after. So I don't, other than to say like she received some weird visions that made her go crazy temporarily. Huh.
There's a Lemongate question here if you're down.
Yeah.
While the Lemongate hint around Dany not knowing the Titan of Braavos is subtle enough, it comes with its own problems. Specifically, it makes Dany appear bizarrely ignorant of the world. Not only does she not know about one of the world's seven wonders, but has the Titan ever come up elsewhere in her life?
I mean, this is a problem just from the beginning. I mean, I think there's some sort of blockage in her mind that she's continuing to ignore this fact. Because yeah, the Titan of Braavos is pretty darn famous, and she's from Braavos, and she probably like she has. We haven't seen any memory of a screaming Titan every hour, on the hour or her or like it. I think that it's the kind of thing that happens with repressed memories and how people deal with them. I don't know if you've ever like there's things in psychology where people like refuse to accept that for example they have paralysis in their arm or that a certain person is dead or something, and they'll their brain just can't process it, so they just refuse to accept it. And
Mm-hmm.
I think Bravos is just one of those things. Like she's like nothing makes sense, so her brain is just gonna process it differently.
How do you feel about the apparent contradiction between this chapter and Daenerys 3, A Game of Thrones, regarding the Dothraki Sea having wet and dry seasons there and winter here? We appreciate the connection to the Night's Watch for the sake of referencing their oath, but it does not appear to be more than a tension-grabbing non sequitur and a potential link to Jon. The snow and oath seem to be mutually reliant, but neither one seems justified beyond that mutual reliance.
No, no. So I'll tell you how winter came about. First of all, like the idea that the Dothraki Sea doesn't have a winter, like come on. Look how big the Dothraki Sea is. Look how far north it goes. Look how far north base Dothrak is. It's like on the same latitude as Harrenhal, like in the Riverlands. Like so the idea that like Jorah, first of all, fuck Jorah Mormont, but second of all, like Jorah Mormont's random comment that it has a rainy season and a dry season, like like come on. But even accepting that normally it's a rainy and dry season, we know that like winter is coming and weather is doing crazy stuff. So I'll tell you how that all came about. So from the beginning, one of the first issues that we were dealing with is how do you not have Dany raped by the Dothraki? Because I'm not gonna fucking put a chapter forward with Dany getting raped by the Dothraki. Like it's just it everyone would be like, oh, Preston Jacobs did some fan fiction and Dany got raped. Like that would be the only story. And I just don't want a point of view character like describing this, because the chapter would be that, and it's the only thing people would remember or take from it.
Mm-hmm.
So right from the beginning, I needed a reason, a good reason for Dany not to be raped by the Dothraki. So I knew I was going to begin with a laundry list of rules and doctrine from the Dosh Colleen on why and one of them would be it's whoever mates with the Dosh Colleen is completely damned, and so that was there in the beginning. And so after I wrote that paragraph, I was like, this is very much like the Night's Watch vows. And I was like, okay, so maybe we can do a Night's Watch kind of parallel. And then I was like, that's a good attention grabbing way to introduce the chapter. Would be to her mention, thinking about the Night's Watch. And then I'd be like, and then that kind of led into, well, then I have to explain why she would know about the Night's Watch. So I got to mention Viserys. So like the beginning there, came about pretty early. And then I read one of the submissions, And one of the submissions had winter during at Vastoth Rock, and I was like, oh man, that's pretty cool, you know. So it is the descriptions of winter in Vastoth Rock, and I was just like, oh, image wise, that's just so much more interesting than than it being, you know, the same season, and it fits with the Night's Watch stuff. And I was like, oh, okay, that's a really good idea. So I shift, like at that point after reading that submission with winter being in Vastoth Rock, I was like, okay, it's going to be winter. And then for that reason, I was like, well, if it's going to be winter, I've got to come up with a transition. And then I was like, well, there's a long march from the middle of the Dothraki Sea to Vastoth Rock. Asha does a long march as like the storm gets worse. I'm going to have a parallel scene where Dany's march parallels Asha's march, you know, as it becomes more and more, you know, wintry. And you know, at that point I was just like, oh, it fits too well. It fits too well, you know? So that's how that all came about. Like it was kind of an organic thing, but you know, I needed those rules. And those rules led to the Night's Watch. And then when I read the submission of Vastoth Rock being winter, I was like, oh, this is just too perfect. It's too perfect. Plus, you know, the story's got to move forward. We got to get to winter. So that's how that all came about. There was an evolution to it. Now, on a larger question of like, oh, this doesn't fit with what went before, you have to remember that if you only have everything fit what went before, the story's not going to branch into anything cool and new. Like imagine if you had to do a fan fiction of A Dance with Dragons, relying only on what we have up to A Feast for Crows, right? Do you think anyone would push forward Aegon, the Aegon story? You know?
That's a good point.
You know, like that's so out of left field that it's not really based on much before. And you know, so if somebody wrote that, they'd be like, oh my God, you're bonkers. Or I'm trying to think of like another good example. Oh, all of Arya's stuff at the House of Black and White, based on everything before, do you think like anyone would have let a fan fiction person write the Arya stuff? Because it completely utterly contradicts Jaqen and Hagar in the Clash of Kings, right? And so like someone would be like, oh my God, like you don't know the lore, you completely contradicted everything Jaqen and Hagar said. Well, you know, when it came down to it, George R.R. Martin did it, and everybody's like, well, it's canon because George R.R. Martin did it. So, you know, so there has to be some risks that one is willing to take. There has to be, you know, you can't stay in the comfort zone of what's come before. There must be a breakout. So I do think it's funny to like get on me for something as small as making it winter in Vastoth Rock. Like you've gotta let people break out and write something new, you know, or else it's just not going to be anything. You know, like you've got to have some liberties. You've got to be like, oh no, this is fucking bonkers and crazy. Because George R. R. Martin writes bonkers and crazy. Like the Elaine sample chapter is completely like there is no fucking like foreshadowing of a tournament happening when she like walked down the mountain. Like had a sample chapter, had a fan fiction like story come out, I would have been like, what? Where is this coming from? Like this is not what Littlefinger was planning. Like this is not what Sansa was thinking about. Why would they be doing a tourney when winter is coming? That's so stupid. George R. R. Martin did it, and it's a fucking great chapter. You know, or Aeron, which is fucking arguably the best chapter that's ever been written. You know, like people would be like, dude, it was established in the Wayward Bride chapter that Aeron was leading a grassroots like rebellion on the Iron Isles, okay? And then you write a fucking chapter that he's being tortured in the belly of Euron's ship. Like, and I mean, and that they're gonna, you know, attack Old Town with perhaps blood and krakens and everything. People would have been like, you're bonkers. So you have to allow some fucking freedom to do some shit. I'm not gonna be bound by Jorah fucking Mormont. It's random fucking line in Daenerys 3 at Game of Thrones when it's stupid. It's stupid. Like, look at the fucking Dothraki Sea. Like, look where it is. Like, of course it fucking snows there occasionally. Like,
Are you gonna
come
put a map of the
on.
Dothraki Sea when we cover that when you edit this?
I mean, you could just bring up the maps of Ice and Fire, or whatever. I mean, yeah, I'll throw it in. But it's just like, come on, like it's at the same latitude as Harrenhal and the Riverlands. Like, come on, like of course it's gonna fucking snow. But even if it weren't, even if it were down at like Dorne level, I'd still be like, nah, that's still fucking cool. It's still fucking cool that it's snowing in Vastoth Rock. Like, and these Dothraki are dealing with snow. Like, that's fucking crazy. Like, every aspect of the chapter, like atmosphere wise, was just so much better once I took the idea from the submission I read, where it's just like, oh man, when she goes to the womb of the world, there's just so much more about like crunching of ice and the cold water and the warm water as a contrast, and like everything, it all came together so much better. Like her going into the warm water and the water feeling warm, like versus like when she went in it before and it felt cold. Like it just everything fell together so much better with it being winter. I couldn't imagine it not being winter now. Like, it's so canon in my mind that Dany is like heading towards Vastoth Rock on this like march, much like Asha's, and it transitions to winter. It's just it was too good of an idea that I just had to the submission, like, thank you. I forget which submission it was, but it was like, thank you. It was such a fucking good idea.
No problem. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. uh, do you want to move on to the next question?
Sure thing.
Some people felt there was too heavy an emphasis placed on parallels and references to the detriment of the actual story. The Bloodraven-esque Crone seemed quite heavy-handed, but ultimately appropriate. But things like Cal Ragat, I think I'm saying his name right, discussed a lot both in our community and the comments of the original video, just seemed like a reference for reference's sake. Do you agree? And if you do, how do you feel about how could you avoid / workshop such references in the future?
I mean, there's a lot of references, but I don't think it's necessarily more than other sample chapters. Like, Tyrion sample chapter is just filled with references. Like, it's just non-stop references. And then others are not. Like the Elaine sample chapter is not that many references. I mean, there's some. You're definitely like going back to the Hands Turney and Ashford and things like that. But there's not as many references. But so it all depends. I'm not saying it's out of George's wheelhouse to put that many references in, but there's a lot. Now, was it at the detriment of other things? Sure, yeah. I mean, like I say, like I felt there wasn't enough Dany internal monologue, and they're Pono and Jocko don't have any character to them and things like that. There could have been more, but a lot of it was unavoidable. Like, a lot of the references just kind of like I was there, and then I'm like, well, it's at this point I might as well like throw in something. Like the One-Eyed Crone, she's going to be this major character, and of course she's going to be like Bloodraven. So when Dany goes to talk to the One-Eyed Crone, like, how can I not do a fucking Bran parallel where she's like talking to her? Like, it's too, like, I can't undo it at that point. Or like when I talk about like Dany's march to Vastoth Rock, and it's like, well, I need to make it be winter, so there has to be a transition. How can I not have it be an Asha parallel? There's a lot of that where it's just like, well, god damn it, like it's got to be this has to be paralleled because it's just too similar. Like, and now I'll say, like, I don't know if everybody got, like, there's a question of also like what's heavy-handed and what's not. And for each little reference, I struggled with whether or not people would get it. Like, I don't think the average reader would understand that there was an Asha parallel with Dany marching to Vastoth Rock. Like Carmine, did you get that was a parallel?
No, I did not.
Yeah, right. but like I put that in, and I'm not sure if how many people got that parallel. And so, but like, yeah, the one-eyed crone one is very obvious, right? Like, you know, she's sitting on this throne, and I did get a recommendation because before she was actually sitting on a throne, and somebody said, hey, why don't you dial it back a little bit? And I was like, okay, fine, and I made it into a bench. Um, you know, because he's like, you don't want to be too on the nose. I was like, okay. I mean, she's already a one-eyed crone, and she's already eating the bloody yogurt and pomegranate steak thing. Um, so you know, there's stuff like that, and then there was like, okay, like Viserys' skull and bitter steel and stuff like that. Like, are people going to make that connection unless I make it a little more explicit and things like this? And it's not that George R. R. Martin isn't sometimes really explicit with stuff, because he is, and then other times he's not. So it's like Beric Dondarrion sitting on a weirwood throne with one eye, is pretty darn heavy-handed. But I don't know. So it's all into things by individual things. I struggled with, like, once I encased the Valyrian Sphinx in ice, I was like, ugh, are people gonna even get that that's a 79 Sentinels thing? And I was like, nah, that's too subtle. Like, I don't think anyone would get that I'm like comparing her to a trapped 79 Sentinel in the Night's Watch, and that's her own feeling. And I felt like there wasn't enough Dany internal monologue anyway, so like I added her like thinking about the 79 Sentinels and things like that. So
Wait. You didn't think people would get the reference?
yeah,
I
like I
think you
thought it was,
give a lot of the no offense, but I don't think you give the audience sometimes enough credit they deserve, because sometimes, and you've admitted this to me privately as well, the audience catches things, whether it's in the book or in the show, a lot faster than we do. So I
oh,
think
I
they
mean,
would.
the super fans do, but like the
That's true.
chapter isn't just for the super fans. I mean, you're a super fan, and you didn't get the Asha, and you didn't get the Asha thing, and I'm sure there's a bunch of other references. Like, any super fan is not going to hit all of them.
Good
Like,
point.
you know, only when I went through like the Tyrion chapter line by line did I see all these references. Like, and I'd read that chapter several times, and I was like, oh god, like this is really heavy fucking handed. Like, there's and still I was like, I'd missed it. So you know, it all depends on who's reading it. Like, I saw some comments from people that are like, I read this and I was lost. I don't know who these characters are, because I didn't remind people who, like, Calpono and Caljaco and Calzecco and all of these people were. Like, these are all characters that appeared before, but you know, or Aroa. Like, Aroa's been explained every fucking book by George, and we all still forget about her. Like he's re-explained the importance of Aroa like 5 times in the
Eroa,
story.
I called her Eroa. Eroa, she's the
It's
one
hard.
where
Aroa,
that she's the Larsian girl, right?
Eroeh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Eroeh. Yeah.
Ironically enough, Eroa, she's by the way, once again, I butchered the shit out of her name a couple of questions back, but she's mentioned in the Dance of Dragons, isn't she?
Oh yeah, a couple times.
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
She's mentioned like a couple times in every book. Dany changes the story of what happened a
Wasn't
little
she
bit.
supposedly wasn't she like supposedly raped by the show and the book mix it up, but in the books isn't she the one that the writer's trying to rape, and then Dany tries to stop it?
Yeah. So
But at
she's
the end of it, but at the end, when Cal Drogo's Khalasar breaks up, she gets raped and killed anyways.
yes.
That's okay. That's her. All right.
Yeah. So she's saved from being raped by Dany, and then Aroa has nowhere to go. So I think she like stays. Well, you know, she's still with the Lazarene, I guess, with Mir Mazdoor's around, but Aroa is still around. So Aroa is traveling with them, and then the Khalasar breaks up, and Mago rapes her and then gives her as a gift to Caljaco, and then Caljaco gives her to his blood riders, who all proceed to rape her and then cut her throat. And so, but when Dany retells the story, it's different every time. Sometimes it's like Jocko and Mago who rape and kill her, and and things like that. And it's like, well, Mago actually doesn't kill her. Mago rapes her, and Jocko doesn't actually even rape her or kill her, but he gives her to a bunch of people that rape her and kill her. But it's like how he like summarizes it is different every time. But yeah.
So is this Dany misremembering, or is that George misremembering? Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
But no, I think you should keep doing. Yeah, even though it's all the super fans will get it, and I understand you're trying to get like new people who are not as big super fans of the books. I still think you should try to strike a balance, which I think you did fairly
Yeah.
well.
It's tough. It's really tough.
But I'm
Like
biased, so.
yeah.
By the way, some people are asking me if I had any input in all of this, and no, I
No.
specifically am staying away because this is your project. It needs to be 100% you and the people who write.
Well,
I'm
you said that when Littlefinger stuff comes around, you would like some input on what Littlefinger does.
Yes, give him, make him taller, muscles, big cock, of course. You got to include that, and I'm kidding, of course. I'm kidding, maybe. Next question here is regarding Daenerys 1. Some of us had questions about the nature of Dany's injuries. For example, her cheeks are described as being horribly injured, and then never discussed again. What was the reason for this?
Well, the reason, I wanted things to be a little more shocking and extreme at the end. Like the impact of her message needed to really hit Pono. She wants him to buy it. So I had her dig into her cheeks in a parallel to Catelyn. So like, I don't know if you caught that one, but
That one I did catch.
okay. That's a red wedding. That's a red wedding callback. But yeah, but I needed it to be extreme and memorable. Like people needed to believe her, and celebrate and get drunk. Because that's her plan. That she's that's her red wedding of stuff. Her Miro thing. But yeah, that was the reason. It was just that. Now it's not mentioned again because there's hardly any. There's hardly any chapter after that. I mean, they just go to the lake after that. But I mean, it's something like in a future chapter she could talk about like picking the scabs off of her face or something, or that kind of stuff.
Sure,
But
you'll just remember to put that in there, picking the scabs
yeah,
off her face.
yeah.
You also we discussed this privately, but you also wanted to discuss George R. R. Martin, his attitude towards fan fiction.
Sure. George R. R. Martin. I mean, in different. So some people are like, "Oh, George R. R. Martin hates fan fiction," and it's like, yeah, but he's got a couple odd, different reasons for it. So he's criticized fan fiction in interviews first because he thinks it's a crutch for writers, and that good writing needs to go beyond that, and that you're stuck in other people's ideas, which um, I I think he's if he truly believes it, he's kind of being hypocritical because George R. R. Martin steals lots of ideas. Okay, um, uh, so I don't know. I mean, I don't necessarily think that fan fiction is bad for writing. I think it's whatever gets people's creative juices flowing. I think it's fun. The woman who wrote 50 Shades of Grey like began as a fan fiction writer, and she became very successful. So I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with fan fiction. For those people that don't know, 50 Shades of Grey, which is a big sex story, was originally Twilight fan fiction, and then she just changed all the names and removed the supernatural elements, and it became one of the biggest like selling books of all time. So I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with fan fiction, but his second criticism was he thought that it was it was trying to steal money from him. You know,
Wait, what? How?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I actually watched an interview with him, and he's actually sitting next to his publisher. And they asked him about fan fiction, and he said, like, look, these are these things are like owned by me, and I have contracts and deals with other people, and so it's only a time, it's only a matter of time before like I sue you, or one of my more likely one of the people that I have contracts with sues you for like using these like likenesses. Um, and then they asked the publisher the same question, and the publisher's like, yeah, no, fan fiction is not on our radar. We don't care about it. Go for it. Like, and so it's like the person whose job it actually was to worry about money, like said like, no, we don't care. And it was George that said like he was worried about the money. Um, it's a weird interview. If I find it, I'll link it. But but yeah. So with this, like, look, there's no money involved in the fan fiction thing. Like, we're not monetizing. We're not monetizing the video the chapter videos. Like, nobody's getting paid. Like, it's
That's
all
right. We had
volunteer.
that.
So
That's right. I was talking to Preston about this. How he's not monetizing the Winds of Winter fan fiction chapter he's putting out. Which, I mean, as someone who like dives into YouTube and all that stuff, I know you're not really like into that stuff, but I
yeah,
always try to like talk to other YouTubers who are in the know and all that stuff, and networks and all that stuff. I don't see if you did monetize it. I don't see what trouble you could get into since it just is fan fiction. But at the same time, I understand how you want to keep your nose clean and not want to
yeah.
cause
I
any
mean,
issues.
look. I mean, I understand that the probability of somebody caring about it, like, from a publisher point of view, is very low. But I think I'm doing it. I think there's that though. Like, there is that. So like, legally speaking, I'm not like when people talk about like copyright and fan fiction and stuff like that. Like, there's issues of whether or not you are costing the original author money, so it's like, if I am profiting off of somebody else's IP, um, that's an issue. And this is very different from what Carmine and I do normally, which is analysis. Analysis is okay under copyright. So like analysis, or if you've changed something enough that it becomes some new like thing, then that's okay. But fan fiction is definitely just in their world. Like, if I were an actual company and it was successful, like, you'd get sued in a second. But it's only because you're like small that no one bothers. But fan fiction is, if it's done for profit, would be illegal. So it would be against copyright law. Um, so yeah, there's no monetizing of the videos. Nobody's getting paid. Um, you know, things like that. I'm not accepting donations under that guise of writing this. Like, this is something for fun, and it was if anything, it's been interfering with other things in my life, other videos being made. It took a lot of fucking time to do that first chapter. So, I was losing sleep over it. I was thinking about it at night. I was
Oh
like, oh
wow.
god. Oh yeah, yeah.
On that note, when are we getting the second chapter, and who's it going to be?
The second chapter is probably going to be Ariel Hota.
Mm.
Yeah. And there's probably going to be a little more freedom with because I don't, unlike Daenerys, where I kind of knew exactly what I wanted to do because there's all these plot lines that needed to be wrapped up. I'm not so sure what I want to do with Arya. Like, I know he's going to be heading towards High Hermitage, with Obara Sand and Balon Swan, and heading in the same direction is probably Alaria and her daughter heading to Hellholt. So, and I imagine they'd be going with however many knights like came with Balon Swan and some other knights. So I imagine it's generally a parallel to Beric Dondarrion going out to bring justice to the mountain. So I'm pretty sure that the chapter would be named The Prince's Justice. Um, but I'm not sure what would happen. Like, obviously, he's going to pass by Hellholt, and you're going to get descriptions of that that house, and that's where Ilaria Sand is from. And then after that, House Corgyle in the middle of, maybe some descriptions there. I imagine that if you're paralleling Beric Dondarrion, there'd be an ambush of some sort, but I'm not sure who would do the ambush. Like, I know that, like, I'd want it to be revealed somehow that Darkstar is innocent and that Dre is actually the culprit. Things like that.
It's gonna be a great chapter for world building and nice lore from
Yeah,
in Dorne.
right. So it's a lot more in that sense. It's more about world building for Dorne, rather than writing what's come before. There's a lot more freedom in like establishing, like, what Hellholt is about. Like, obviously you're probably going to mention, Rhaenys the Conqueror and Meraxes and her dragon and things like that and stuff like that. But there's a lot of opportunities because it's just don't really know where the plot is going. But there's things I've thought about, like House Blackmont north of High Hermitage is a really big ally of Doran. So, maybe they would be involved in some sort of false flag attack. And then getting into like House Dane and how things work with Sword of the Morning and Sword of the Evening and all these things, I have no idea. I have no idea how to deal with that. So I'll probably within a week I'll have a request for what to do with it.
Gotcha. Are you gonna do an announcement video where you
Yeah, yeah,
announce?
yeah.
Okay. And I find it funny that George is very it's kind of a Scrooge when it comes to fan fiction. Didn't he write fan fiction for Marvel when he was a kid?
He did. He describes things differently though. He kind of says, well, that there's fan fiction where you would, invent a character in the same style as something versus just taking Spider-Man himself and like having Spider-Man do something.
Mm.
But but I don't know. Like, is there much difference? I don't know. It's like you change your names and then you come out with wild cards and somehow like I'm supposed to think that like that's super original. Like, like it's just the X-Men. Like like what the like what the fuck? Like, so I don't know. He's really weird on it. People don't really like. He's been asked about it a few times, and he doesn't really have a very good reason for being against fan fiction. But in his wishes, like I say, like no, there's no profiting off of this. This is just for fun. This is just for fun.
Okay. Well, is there anything else you wanted to tackle before we wrap this up?
No. What else? Any other? That's all the questions?
Those are all the main questions that I think were appropriate for the chapter. Anything else
Okay.
that I've seen here is just, it's just
Yeah,
complaining,
yeah.
and that's not that productive. Not that
Well,
productive.
it's funny. I guess there's one like thing about like writing, and this comes at you. Anyone in the working world knows this too. Like collaborative writing is really it's really difficult because people become really possessive of their writing and their ideas, and so it's really hard sometimes to let stuff go and um, you know even if you think something that your way is better, to just be like, no, I'm just gonna let this one go. um, and so it's tough. I understand, like it's a lot of there's a lot of emotions with writing. So yeah, I mean, this one just kind of came together. I had a lot of submissions. There's a couple that were kind of the backbone for the structure of the chapter, and then a lot of ideas from different places, and then send it to the editor. One of the editors was really good at putting it into George's style. It was just that was really helpful. And then
Yeah, you
I
told me
had
about that guy, how he's really good.
oh yeah, yeah, and then a couple more had some really good input, some input was harsh, but yeah, I try to incorporate everything I agreed with and stuff like that. So um, yeah, so there's these a lot of little changes that you don't realize happened. Like in an earlier version, the one-eyed crone says, instead of clever, she says clever by half, too clever by half. And there, this criticism of like she's sounding too Westerosi, like we're in Dothraki language, stuff like that, and you're like, oh, okay, so we'll shift that away, and stuff like that. So there's a lot of these little changes like that happen that you don't realize until sometimes it's funny because I say like two authors were the main backbone, but like the writing shifts enough that I don't even know if they realize that their writing was the backbone, because they're like, oh, I remember the line I wrote. Well, a lot of times it's like you wrote the line, and it's really important that you wrote the line, but now the line is completely shifted around and sounds different, but it was actually originally, your line. So it's people have like people's contributions are not necessarily apparent because stuff has evolved, but yeah.
I figured people would get pissed that you're taking their ideas and meshing them up with other people's ideas, but for the most part, everybody seems kind of cool with it. So,
Yeah. No, I was pretty happy with it. Pretty happy with it.
and Ariel Hota's next. Can't wait for that one. Do you have any idea when we're gonna get that one?
I mean, I think it's the same kind of process. I'm gonna do an announcement next week, and then people have like a couple weeks to write, and then I'll try to put it together. Maybe it'll be different in this one because I don't have, probably gonna have allow more freedom that I won't write as much, because I did a bit of writing for this for Dany, just like transitioning scenes to scenes, and and the beginning and ending and things like that. So hopefully I won't have to write as much because I that took a lot. Yeah, it takes a lot of time.
All right, sounds good. Preston, do you mind if we wrap it up?
Sure thing.
Guys, thank you so much for joining us on this Game of Thrones podcast where we finally discuss something Winds of Winter related. That's not bad news. That's it's we're getting there. We're getting there. As always, thank you for listening, and we'll see you guys next time. Have a good one.